My name is Richard Gizbert. I work for Al-Jazeera. I do a program called The Listening Post. We don't cover the news, we cover the media. We cover the way the news is covered. This session is all about who gets a voice and why. Who do broadcasters offer their very valuable platforms to? Those are questions that current affairs broadcasters must ask themselves every day as they seek out legitimate, authoritative interviewees and participants to explore and dissect the critical issues of our time. Why is it, for instance, that the most frequent guest to grace the set of BBC's Question Time is Nigel Farage? He's been on that program more than 30 times. That is more than any politician ever elected to Westminster. Why is it that Carole Cadwalladr, the journalist who blew the lid off the Cambridge Analytica story, exposing the impact that dark money has had on politics in both Great Britain and America, gets more airtime on CNN or Netflix than the BBC? Does that make any sense to you? This session has changed from what you would have originally seen in your program. Initially, we had participants from both the BBC's Question Time and Channel 4 scheduled to be here for various reasons, one of which may well be Carole Cadwalladr's presence here. They have chosen not to participate, but Carole's own story is part of what we are talking about here today. To get us started, something that may seem unrelated, but actually is. This is a quick trailer from the recently produced Netflix documentary, The Great Hack, to give you an idea of just who Carole Cadwalladr is and what kind of journalism it is that she has produced. Most of you will think you have a pretty good grip on Cambridge Analytica, their reach, how they operated. The great thing about the doc is that it walks you through the mechanics of the technology, and it also takes the story beyond Trump, beyond Brexit, into Trinidad, into South Africa, into Kenya, and the effect that this company, which is now out of business primarily because of the work of Carole Cadwalladr, has done. Why don't we start, Carole, by talking about the elephants who have chosen not to be in the room today? We've been going back and forth on text as people have been dropping out over the last couple of days. Walk me through what you were thinking.
Thank you very much for coming today, and thank you, Edinburgh, for inviting me. And I started to think of this morning as my Belly of the Beast tour. So I went to Silicon Valley to do this TED talk, and that was really difficult and quite challenging in terms of that audience not wanting to hear what I was saying. And I went to Cannes Lion, which is the advertising industry's big festival. And that was quite, because they had invited Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, to speak, and that was the only coverage they were giving. And so that was pretty challenging. It was kind of very hostile sort of audience. And now I kind of have come here because I was told, I was invited to come and debate the head of BBC Live Politics, Rob Burley. And I just thought, well, it's kind of really important. And I've just, there's been this unending frustration with the way that the BBC in particular has covered these subjects. And I would just really love answers and sort of accountability, actually, and just, some responses from senior executives about the decisions and the choices they're making. And so it is really disappointing that he dropped out and then Hilary Neal, the editor of Question Time, dropped out. And I believe the BBC didn't want to field anybody else.
We don't have them here in real time. What we do have is a couple of statements from them that have been issued over the past few years. Hilary O'Neill, series editor of Question Time, hired in 2017. In these tumultuous political times, it's never been more important to hold politicians to account, to hear directly from people about the issue they care about the most. The more opinions and cross-examination, the better. I look forward to many, I love this part, adrenaline-packed Thursday nights, and to making sure that Question Time stays essential viewing for anyone who wants to be part of the current debate. Tony Hall, BBC Director General, March of this year, we reflect all contributions to a debate and give each their due weight, but no absolute exclusion of viewpoints because they're generally felt to be beyond the pale. We won't give in to pressure to silence dissenting voices, nor allow those voices to be seen as mainstream. Do you want to see those voices silenced?
No, I want to see them contextualised. I think that's the really kind of important thing. So my particular gripe is the fact that every single day, it seems, there are representatives from what are corporate lobby groups, which are these dark money think tanks, which are run out of Tufton Street, who formulate Brexit policy and are given a platform and a mouthpiece, a stage to talk about that on the BBC.
Think tanks, names that some in our audience would have heard.
For example, the Taxpayers Alliance, the Institute of Economic Affairs, Big Brother Watch. There's a whole network of them. And we have these think tanks, so-called think tanks, because they're not think tanks. They rate on the most untransparent of all such groups in Britain. And they won't disclose their funders. But what we do know about their funders is that they are big oil, they're big pharma, they're the Koch brothers, the sort of notorious American billionaires who've done exactly the same thing in the States. And what's so fascinating to me in sort of tracking this subject has always been these links between the United States and between Britain. And we can really see it in the way the money is flowing in to Britain. And so the way that that is getting a platform and a voice inside our most important broadcasters without explaining to the public that particular aspect, I really, really profoundly think is a huge problem. And I have actually challenged Tony Hall on that at a panel debate he did earlier this summer. He said he was going to have meetings about it. He said that was something they could discuss. I haven't heard back, obviously.
By the way, the app will provide you with a means to ask questions. We do have a microphone if we don't have enough questions coming to us over the app, but the app is your platform. Please keep them coming because I find that always spices up what it is that we do. You were telling me that you think you've spent gotten a total of amount of airtime from the BBC over the past 12 months of 3 minutes?
No, over 3 years of doing this, nearly 3 years now of doing this investigation, I think I've probably had 2 minutes on the BBC in total on broadcast. And
this weekend you got 6 minutes on CNN.
And this weekend I had 6 minutes on CNN. Actually, and Al-Jazeera has done really good coverage on the story. That's another reason for why I came. And I kind of make a point now of doing stuff when I try and do as much sort of foreign broadcast stuff as I can now, in terms of, so German television always wants to cover this. I mean, the Swedish national broadcaster is all over this story. I mean, they know about the kind of intricacies of sort of vote leave overspending to a degree which has never, ever been explained on our national broadcaster. And my strategy now is that I kind of think, so the reason for doing the CNN thing, even though that was shown only in the States, it wasn't on CNN International, is that there's a clip and it kind of bounces back into Britain in some way. You know, I kind of am using the social media networks as a way of amplifying this story, because one of the frustrations we've had about is just being locked inside this liberal media bubble, which is, you know, The Guardian and Observer. And so I'm always trying to kind of reach out and it really, really needs to be seen and understood by more people. And, you know, it's kind of why, although personally I found it difficult doing the Netflix thing, I kind of never wanted this level of exposure, but at the same time, this kind of having a global platform and having people like understand the story in a kind of profoundly different way has been really important. And I think it does show up. It's kind of like the, you know, situation here in Britain.
We're going to talk more about that in a bit. I do want to get back to just the platforming thing. And I know you people probably haven't seen Nigel Farage on Question Time for a couple of weeks, so we've managed to get a clip together. If we could roll that now, please. He really is a bit of a co-host on that program now, isn't he? I mean, he's been there so often. So let's just talk about the platform, and let's just set aside your story and Cambridge Analytica for a moment. Why the addiction?
It's ratings, and that is profoundly sort of antithetical to public service broadcasting. I mean, these are two different things, and but yet, you know, we're in this situation every Thursday. They look for fireworks. They look for fireworks in terms of who's on the panel. They look for fireworks of who's in the audience. And I don't think that is really following the BBC's mission of, you know, educating and informing. Is that the mission? Have I got that right? So it's one of their missions. And it's such a sort of profoundly serious moment in Britain's history. For that to be our political discourse is just really troubling because, you know, we're in a fog of disinformation and propaganda. And this should be the moment when, you know, it is our publicly funded broadcasters really step up to the challenge and try and, you know, tell people the facts. And I think one of the things, for example, on Question Time is that there's often a real absence of facts. I mean, they could just occasionally have somebody who knows about the subject on, for example.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, this is a network that the conservative commentariat claims is liberal and always paints as liberal, because I suppose when they compare them to the fairly conservative British newspapers, you know, the bulk of which are conservative, so it's not really ideological, is it? Do you see this as a programming imperative or something ideological?
I don't think. I think it's. I don't think it's ideological, and I mean, I think it's a real absence of leadership. I think that's what it has to come down to. This should be at a senior executive level. These decisions and judgments should be being made and should be being filtered through the organisations. And I think that hasn't happened. And so I think for all of the hard-working, brilliant journalists and producers who work in these outfits, you know, are kind of struggling to make sense of, you know, the imperatives of ratings and overnights and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where I feel it's kind of that, you know, there's a lack really. And I'd love to. I mean, I just think we need to hear from. I think there just needs to be accountability. That's the most basic thing. I just would like to hear them, you know, make coherent statements on these issues, I suppose.
We were thinking about leaving the empty chair here, but, you know, it'll be a bit tacky. While you have your phones in front of you, I'd like you to search something that we'll refer to a little bit later. Search Carole Cadwalladr and GoFundMe. I want to talk about money, you know, because in journalism, you know, the cliche first thing we are taught is to follow the money. And when watching output on British broadcasting, oftentimes, and you referred to it, dark money, think tanks, how much of it do you think is driven by money? And I suppose what I'm trying to say is there a certain legitimacy accorded by the broadcasters to the voice if that voice is propped up with big
powerful
money?
I mean, that is what is so fascinating, and that actually is the wonderful thing about this groundswell, this really, really genuine groundswell of support that I've got coming in because of this legal challenge from Arron Banks. You know, that you can see that is genuine and that is real, and that is individual people now, nearly 11,000 of them who've pledged to support this. Whereas this thing we know is going on all across the world, this astroturfing of popular opinion by the vested interests of billionaires. I mean, this is clearly, we know this is happening in America. Clearly it is happening here. And clearly these two things are absolutely entwined. And so, you know, it's just such a dereliction of basic journalism to not have that explained, to not have that labelled. And I think perhaps part of the problem is because these are sort of, you know, they're seen as entertainment shows, I guess, to a degree, rather than journalistic output. So maybe that is part of it. But maybe that, again, is something which needs just thinking about.
Money, because as great as The Great Hack is, the thing that jumped out at me that wasn't in that documentary is who funds Cambridge Analytica And that's Robert Mercer, is it not? The Mercer family in the US.
Yeah, who also fund a lot of these so-called think tanks.
Right, and I'm just wondering why, and I know you didn't produce it, I thought I would have heard their name. So they lurk, even in a critical documentary, they lurk unnamed, contextually. I'm just wondering why it wasn't there. Any idea?
I don't know. I mean, the filmmakers very much made their own choices with what they covered and how they did it. So
and I'm sure they left out a lot of good stuff.
But that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's not there. What I was talking about, the GoFundMe page, talk to us a little bit about you and Aaron Banks. I mean, for all of your reporting that you did for The Guardian and The Observer, he didn't sue you over that, if I understand correctly. The lawsuit that he issued had to do with a TED Talk that you referred to, did it not?
Yeah, it's a TED Talk, another talk for the convention, and a tweet.
So that means, now the other thing to remember, and this is the boring part, you're a freelancer with The Guardian. Had he sued you over something you published in the paper or on the website, then it's a Guardian legal issue.
Yeah.
But he didn't, so it isn't.
Yeah.
How supportive have they been of you, even though the lawsuit doesn't relate directly, it can be argued, to their operation?
So, I think there's a kind of old-fashioned, I think one of the things which has happened is sort of the information, like the information sphere has changed so radically and completely that I think that news organisations still think in kind of quite old-fashioned terms about some things. So, for example, I think the competitiveness between news organisations, I find like really outdated and inappropriate now. It's like we need each other and we need to actually to be networked and to be linked together and to be strong because, the truth is our basic, we're trying to like stand up against lies. And so I think this is that in the sense that The Guardian is prepared to defend journalism which is on their platform, but not somebody talking about their journalism when they're getting sued. Aaron Banks it's been widely recognised by the sort of freedom of press associations and human rights organisations. This is just intimidation. It is bullying and intimidation and harassment. And he's not taking it against any of the news organisations which have done really good work, such as Channel 4's excellent work on that. Against, the parliamentary report, after all, is that the facts were contained within that. But he can't sue them because they've got parliamentary privilege. He's not suing the New York Times, which published this stuff, or the Washington Post. He's coming after me. And that is pretty difficult because I'm really lucky in that I have got this incredible public support, and I've had lawyers who've stepped forward to work, put in hours and hours of work they're going to have to do on a conditional fee arrangement, it's called, which is that if we lose, they would get not a penny. I don't know, sorry, I'm trying to be diplomatic, but...
No, what you're trying to be is you're trying not to get sued again. Because you were choosing your words, I'm guessing, far more carefully today than you would have that day in Silicon Valley at the TED Talk. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, it's that everything now is, it's literally he is silencing me. I mean, that's what this lawsuit is about. And it's not just silencing me, it's already taking up so much time, the stuff you have to do to prepare for a lawsuit. I mean, we need to stand united against this. I mean, you know what one of the problems is? It comes back to this thing about the coverage of the story, is that Aaron Banks is not a household name in any shape. He just isn't. I had this really interesting, I was at the Hay Festival and they employ volunteers to drive you to the station. And I had this guy, he was like a retired CEO. And I was really interesting. I went through kind of like, I asked him what he got his news from the BBC website and from the Times. He read the Times on Saturday. Anyway, and he actually came from Bristol. And I sort of said, and he just did not know who Aaron Banks was. And the story has not been covered. And sorry, I'm kind of... And so the reason why Aaron Banks can go after me is because there just has not been enough coverage. There has not been enough journalism. And that's kind of across the board. And it's because our print media is so partisan. I mean, it is owned by foreign oligarchs, you know, with a section of the Guardian and Observer. And so it is that the broadcast media, you know, it stands as the neutral informational base. And it needs to step up. And it hasn't. And, you know, apart from, as I say, you know, Channel 4 News did this great work on him, and that's been really important. But again, that's still niche. We still need it. I mean, if you're not on the BBC, if it doesn't appear on BBC News, it's like it hasn't happened in Britain, because it controls so much of the national news, the regional news, the radio, the TV. And so the day after that we published, and the Sunday Times published about Aaron Banks's covert relationship with the Russian government, these gold and diamond deals he'd been offered, and the New York Times published, the Washington Post published, CNN covered it. I think, but the BBC didn't. And I was invited on the Today programme to talk about it. And then they said, would I debate Isabel Oakeshott on it? And I was like, well, would I debate Isabel Oakeshott? So they had somebody from the other side to balance it. And I said, well, if you want somebody from the other side, you really need to have the Russian government here, because that is the other side. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
Question from the audience. Is the BBC underestimating its audience by not wanting to cover a story like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think people really respond to the truth. And the truth is really pretty shocking. I mean, it's really pretty shocking. The biggest funder of the Brexit campaign is under a criminal investigation because we don't know where that money came from. And over 3.5 years, a bunch of journalists, Guardian, Observer, Open Democracy, Channel 4 News, have been trying, Financial Times, have been trying to track this money. And there's just so many questions. And so to not cover this insane set of meetings with the Russian embassy is, I don't get it.
Another question from the audience. Say live current affairs broadcasters have to platform a range of voices. What, it says tricks, I guess, methods could we use to stop people making incorrect claims on live shows? Is there anything you can do about that, or are they kind of good with it?
How do you mean?
Is the BBC good with it? Are the programs good with the outrage?
No, I mean, there's just this total lack. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to complain about something which has been on air, which is factually incorrect. I mean, good luck with that.
Yeah, no, our previous question was, shouldn't Ofcom be looking into this?
Yeah, oh, right, sorry. Yeah, I mean, you'd hope so. You would hope so. I mean, I don't know, I'm not enough of an expert to know kind of where Ofcom is in this battle, but I mean, you know, but there's so many issues. The fact that, you know, Russia Today broadcasts complete lies and conspiracy theories to the public, which is, I mean, that seems to be, we're okay with.
Well, every once in a while, Ofcom does find them and set them back a little bit.
I know,
every once
but
in a while.
It's just, you know, this is a sort of national security issue.
Yeah, a bit wrist slappy, isn't it?
It's just that it's again this thing about the information space has changed, and this is state propaganda, and it's deliberately feeding disinformation into the network, which has an effect upon our political discourse. Now, again, I just feel that's something which we should be asking more questions about.
On the GoFundMe page, if you people have gone there, you'll see that Carole is looking to raise £300,000. That's the target. It's up to 294,000, 10,600 donors, tons of shares. I always like to go through the names. There's a lot of anonymous stuff there. Maybe that's the Guardian for 20 quid. Sorry, I take that back. That was unfair. But what I find most revealing are some of the comments. And, you know, keep up the good work on shining light into dark places. Solidarity, sister, you deserve a knighthood for what you've uncovered. Without journalists like Carole, we will sleepwalk into a totalitarian state. Democracy is sacrosanct. Keep fighting, Carole. Weaponization of personal data needs to be stopped. Is that the kind of stuff that keeps you going, or? I mean, the money they're sending helps too. That's what
No,
keeps
the
it going.
moral support has been really important. It's kind of, it's been, I didn't volunteer for this in a sense. I've kind of got plunged into this story. It's changed my life, and not always in good ways. It's daily abuse and trolling and bullying and misogyny. That's the thing which kind of like depresses me the most. You can't get away with being racist without being called out on Twitter or anti-Semitic, but you can get away with being misogynistic. And I get it on an absolute daily basis. And it's just really deeply unpleasant. And so the support of the kind of people in the public has kept going a bit, I suppose.
The Facebook component of the Cambridge Analytica story is obviously critical. Recently, BBC took a long look at Facebook. You had some questions about the product. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so there was this very strange documentary 3 weeks ago. I don't know if anybody here saw it. And basically it was like exclusive access inside Facebook. And after the shockwave of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, how did the company respond? And it was an hour long, and it followed such characters as a press officer. And he talked about how emotionally difficult it was, that the Cambridge Analytica scandal kind of really upset them. And I waited. I kind of hate-watched it to at least like assess it fairly, waiting for somebody to say, well, actually, it's kind of a bit of a problem what Facebook's power they have in the world. And here's another opinion on, what it means to have a tech monopoly controlling your sort of information streams. And it didn't come. And I couldn't really believe it. I was like, it was essentially a kind of corporate propaganda video. And then I looked at the date of it, and they'd started filming 1 month after we broke the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So they'd been invited in, it seemed, to the headquarters, and then I was like, well, what were there conditions for this access? And how did it come about? Did a senior executive reach out? There were so many questions I wanted to know. And then actually, I didn't publish this, but then an academic got in touch with me. And he said, oh, actually, Carole, it's worse than that, because they did interview a whole load of us critics. And but then they emailed me to say they'd taken a different editorial direction, and they'd all been left out. And again, after that, I watched it the night before, and then with so much of these things, I got up the next morning, I thought, right, stop, oh, damn it, they can't, and I'm going to write a letter. And I thought, what is the point? I've written so many of these, they just do nothing. And so then actually, I rang up an MP who's on the culture committee, and I was like, please, can somebody, all I want is just answers to the questions. These are just things we should know. Were there conditions placed on access? Why didn't they have any critical voices? We cannot cover technology companies in this way anymore. I mean, it's just really basic, is that, they had this lack of critical coverage for years, and it's kind of why we're in the mess we're in. We now have to hold them to account, and our national broadcaster has to lead the charge in that. And I'm sorry, I can feel feels a bit emotional doing this event today, because it's hard trying to raise these things when you just don't get any response. And I just don't know what the avenues are to even, I thought that's why I came up today, was because I thought, well, at least this is a moment to hear what they have to say. And that would be important. Even if I disagree with it, I think it's important to hear what they have to say on it.
We have a question here, or a statement actually. Hi, I'm Dorothy Byrne, Head of News and Current Affairs at Channel 4. I would have been proud to sit beside the brilliant Carole. Sorry, I did not know. Left hand not talking to the right hand. That question of access bedevils journalism around the world. People were saying back in 2003, Iraq War, the U.S. press corps not asking the Bush administration the tough questions. And people would tell me at the time, well, they want to protect their access. They want to be, when their hand goes up during the briefing, they want their reporter on the air. BBC News a few months ago went into Iran. They were given great access to parts of the country that Western journalists will seldom see. They haven't confirmed, as far as I know, that one of the conditions of that agreement was that none of this output would appear on BBC's Persian language television service. So and to me, that's the first thing I thought of when you told me the BBC Facebook story. And am I the only one who thinks about access as the devil?
Yeah.
Because Facebook is, I guess, if you're sitting in the newsroom, I mean, I've been in those production meetings, and somebody will have said, ooh, that's a sexy get. And it's like they can't resist, can they?
Yeah, exactly. But it is, and that for years, this was the whole thing of that the technology companies were covered by technology reporters who relied upon access to, that's just what their job depended upon. They needed those quotes from individuals.
The same way political reporters need quotes from...
But it's why the lobby never got the political expenses story. That came from an outsider. And it's why this, I was an outsider in terms of, in so many ways, in that being British, not being in Silicon Valley, not being a tech reporter, being a feature. It's for all those reasons is that the story was dismissed. Even after we kind of revealed lots of things for a year, there was, I had the tech bros, it's just a conspiracy theory and it's just snake oil and they've just oversold it. And, I cannot tell you how, even what's in the Great Hack is just the tip of the iceberg. 154 elections worldwide they claim to have worked on. And the relationships with governments, that's a whole other shit show. The fact that they were working, a long history of working for the British government, for the Department of Defense in America, for NATO. It's so fucked up.
For lack of a better word, or more colorful. You know what the Great Hack reminded me of, and I'm sorry, you're at a bit of a disadvantage if you haven't seen the documentary. There's all this focus on Cambridge Analytica and this organization that Carole basically effectively helped put out of business. But you can't, there's no celebratory feel towards the end of it. And the reason for that is, it reminded me of a documentary I saw years ago on Napster. Remember Napster, the first free music platform, everybody's sharing it. Hollywood music industry is just all over it with a ton of lawyers, and eventually they take Napster down and you can see these lawyers clinking their glasses, having a good time. And I'm like, where are those music companies today? They're out of business. Their problem wasn't Napster. Their problem was the technology. Cambridge Analytica may be out of business, but their tricks are out of the bag, and any organization anywhere around the world can just open up that playbook and read it now. And I'm just wondering, is this even fixable? Relates to this question, what needs to happen so that we can have fair and free elections again? Is it legislation? Is it something else?
Well, definitely legislation is just a huge part of it. And the fact that the government, so Parliament has said, we can't have a free and fair election. Our electoral laws don't work. We're entirely vulnerable to all sorts of bad actors interfering. And the government's just ignored it. And yet, even whilst we know we're kind of heading headlong towards another election very shortly, it's why? Why are they ignoring it? Why are they ignoring it? And then you come back to, the other part of the story about what happened in the referendum. What happened in the referendum? These multiple crimes which we know took place, which is, the other thing which I'm totally frustrated has just not been properly covered. And the fact that the government's complicit in that. The government is now being run by the same people who are under a Met Police investigation for this massive electoral fraud, the biggest one for, more than 100 years. It's pretty incredible. You tell that plot line to some of you drama producers, perhaps. That's never going to fly. It's too preposterous. And you can see why people think, oh, it's just some mad conspiracy theory. But these are actual police investigations going on right now. It's really not a conspiracy theory.
The other thing I just want to mention about the documentary, yeah, we know, I mentioned about some of the other countries. What Cambridge Analytica got up to in Trinidad was sinister. So basically, Trinidad is a population that's 49% Afro-Caribbean, 49% South Asian. It's the only Caribbean island so comprised. There are two dominant political parties on either side, and it's always super close. Cambridge Analytica was working for the South Asian political party, and they didn't focus on that message at all. What they did is they focused on Afro-Caribbean youth. And they basically came up with a video campaign with this weird salute called Do So, where they basically were telling people, voting is uncool. This is what your dad does. This is what your parents do. We've got to change things otherwise. They dropped the youth vote turnout on the Afro-Caribbean side by something like 6%. That's all they had to do. So they're not even messaging positively one side of the equation. They're going after the other one. We got about 2 minutes to go. So I'll go with one more question here. Live current affairs under such stress. Is the secret more production resources for journalists to sort through this morass of vested interests? Is that the secret? Is it realistic?
More journalistic resource.
Money.
Money is really important. I mean, the fact is that, 3 years on, I'm still a one-man band at the Guardian and Observer. And, that's not great, especially when you look at resources elsewhere. Money is really important. I mean, it's just, the thing is at the moment, there are so many baddies to go after. There are so many stories. And, I'm just keep on every day. There's something more, somebody sends me something completely fascinating. And so that is definitely part of it, is that, it was, I don't know about you, but sort of 5 years ago, I was pretty despairing of journalism, and certainly despairing of my as an older woman in journalism. There's not many of those around. And now I'm just sort of, it has at least reawoken it, is that we know, there is desperate need for it, and just like holding back this torrent of lies is just so important. So, yeah, I suppose that's like one little glimmer of hope.
This BitTorrent of lies.
Yeah.
Carole Cadwalladr, GoFundMe. It's sitting at 294,000. Let's see where we can get it today. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thank you.